Hello everyone. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge Grace, who is Bessie's great-great-granddaughter. She's here in the front row. And we just met, which was just amazing. The Bessie Flowers Digitised Living Pathway is a proposed project I imagined for an assessment piece that I did a couple of years ago at UWA. The unit's called Intimate Strangers, and we got to investigate a person from history whose life crossed over with another person, most often not from the same culture. I was taught by our beloved local tutor, Dr. Harry Fremantle, and he's based at the Albany campus. My motivation for the project was to elevate our understanding and appreciation for Bessie's life and the impact that she had on her world and also upon our world today. I live in the house where Bessie spent most of her childhood. Built in 1852, Ansfield, later known as Camfield, was a purpose-built school for mostly local Menang children. Located on the corner of Serpentine Road and Crossman Street, Camfield is a state-listed heritage building and is one of Albany's oldest homes. Before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge that if this potential project got the go-ahead by the City of Albany, it must be led by Menang expertise and by Bessie's family. It's just my idea. I'm just throwing it out to the world and hopefully someone will pick it up. Bessie has an important place within the history of Albany. And this proposed self-guided walk through time and space will help reorientate Albany's storytelling to be more inclusive of the Menang historical perspective, reawakening Bessie's story by creating a permanent living and interactive pathway through her homeland will ensure her unique lived experience is preserved for future generations. And it's also an opportunity to engage directly with the places that Bessie had a deep connection. Bessie effectively wrote herself into history through her letters to colonial newspapers, powerful decision makers in government and on missions, and also to her school mum, Anne Camfield. The writings of Bessie Flower offer us a unique, especially unique worldview from an articulate and attentive woman who navigated two vastly different worlds throughout her short lifetime. Bessie's personal evolution is of greatest interest to me. She was a curious teen, and then she evolves into a position of leadership for her family, and she becomes an advocate for her community, and she pushes back against the colonial powers that controlled her freedom of movement. Bessie Flowers is a she-hero. She's a shero. Bessie's writing has been examined by numerous Australian historians like Bain Atwood, and many others have followed, most recently Sharon Hubner, who co-authored with Ezard Flowers a work called No Longer a Wandering Spirit, published last year with UWA Press, and I'd encourage all of you to grab a copy online. Bessie was far more than a sweet girl, seated perhaps in this very chair, dressed in a Victorian gown, looking down from the camera. Bessie Flowers was about 7 or 8 years old when her life entwined with that of Henry and Anne Camfield, as one of the first 6 Menang children to start their education at their school in around 1852. Over the next 19 years, approximately 55 mostly Indigenous children were instructed directly by Anne Camfield, and then later Bessie, where they were taught music, literature, languages and mathematics. Apparently Bessie was an ace chess player, and she was known to be even the best of the sailors on board the ship when she was going to the eastern colonies. Colonial records do not detail the circumstances of Bessie's arrival to the school, but we know she was not an orphan. Her siblings Ada and Harry would come to also live and learn beneath the steep pitched shingled roof of Ansfield in the following years. Ansfield struggled from the outset. Many of the students at the school succumbed to introduced communicable diseases like tuberculosis, measles, influenza and pneumonia. The colonial government assisted at times, and they were often hesitant to completely bankroll the school. So the Camfields personally funded the school, and they would pay for clothing and the food and for the wages of staff and for building repairs. After Henry died and Anne became increasingly frail, the institution closed in 1871, and the remaining 19 students were transported to a mission on the Swan River. This slide, I just kind of thought to put in order kind of the sequencing of her life, and ending with No Longer a Wandering Spirit, which is an incredible story of closing the circle between two families who'd lost contact with each other. This is a fairly wordy slide, so I'll let it explain itself. But the most important aspect of Bessie, and the reason why we do need to have a digital pathway for her, is that she's one of the first Indigenous women in Australia to write about her life. And so as that kind of monumental piece of history has kind of been forgotten, we need to showcase that aspect about Bessie's life. This is a photograph of the school from about 1870. So you can see the students along the front of the house. And then in the foreground, lots of granite rock, which is no longer there. I have no idea where it is, what happened to it. I would like to know where the rocks have gone. The landscape's been changed forever. Somehow then they've disappeared. So the building today, if you get a chance today, drive up Crossman Street and it's up on the left-hand side and looks very, very different. There's a veranda, there's gardens, it's all kikuyu lawn, which is terrible to manage. But it still has its the vibe of that period somewhat. The proposed digital pathway, the idea behind it was for it to start somewhere on York Street, maybe at the church where Bessie used to play the piano and the organ, and then for people to take a stroll up through the beautiful, pretty streets and past the old houses, and then up into the granites and up into the bushland to Cardup, which is Mount Melville. And then to linger up on that panorama and reimagine the landscape back to the 1850s, when the population was just 300 or 400 people. Then to wind back down through the bush, past the old house, then down to Dog Rock, and then down to the wharf where Bessie last saw King Jarling. Of course, this is just an idea. There's probably better pathways and better streets to follow and better tracks, but as a starter, that could be something, a guide for which we could walk along. This is a great example from Perth, a story of Fanny Bolbrook, and this is a pamphlet design that follows the pathway of her story and is probably a good additional resource for people if they prefer not to use a QR coded system. The other idea I had was to be able to have some audio that would play through when you got to these key points in the walk, and maybe some oral histories, some soundscapes from that period, and other unique audio. In 1867, Bessie, aged 17, departed King George Sound for Ramayak Presbyterian Mission located in Gippsland. Bessie was to be the mission's head school teacher and to also escort the Camfield students, Rhoda Toby, Nora White Emily Peters, and also Bessie's youngest sister, Ada. They were all destined to arranged marriages with Christianised Aboriginal mission men. Throughout their passage, Bessie often wrote to Anne, detailing the wondrous minute details of their sea and overland journey to the mission, frequently sharing her feelings of intense homesickness. Bessie often wrote to remind Anne that her internship was just for 2 years, and never mind, I won't have very long to stay. In another heartfelt letter to Anne, Bessie wrote, I thought you were coming here, and I worked myself up into such a state I was continually looking for you across the river and at the gate to see if I could see a carriage. Bessie's dearest wish would never be fulfilled, as Anne would never journey to Victoria and they would not meet again. And you might recognise Bessie. Bessie continued to write from Ramayak to Anne, revealing the inner workings of the Monrovian mission. These communications are an invaluable and rare First Nations testimony of a young Menang woman's lived experience inside the constraints of the Victorian colonial state. Bessie's intended role as a contract school teacher for 2 years would not eventuate, despite the promises made by the missionary Frederick Hagenauer. And this was all arranged before Bessie departed King George Sound, but when she arrived it was a totally different story. Instead, Bessie was required to attend to the domestic duties of the Hagenauer's home and to care for and educate his many children. So she turned into a kind of a governess. Bessie's finely crafted writing skills would move into a new phase to navigate the colonial governance that controlled her mobility and the movement of herself and her family that was created by Victorian legislation from around 1886. Until her death in 1895, Bessie wrote multiple letters requesting permission to visit family or to care for those who were ill, asking for much needed food supplies, to obtain consent from authorities to leave Ramayak Mission, to live outside its operations, and to then later return, all of which left her family experiencing significant financial pressures. Yet despite this, Bessie always wrote with a respectful eloquence. An example of one of her typical opening lines was, "Hoping, sir, you will excuse my taking up a little of your valuable time, as I am writing this in the name of all my sisters of Lake Tyers." And there's a few really interesting references for later on. So in the last few hours or days that you might be here in Albany, I do encourage you to drive up Crossman Street and have a peek. I'll be home, you can come in for a cup of tea and come and see Bessie's house.
No? Beautiful. All right. Oh, out the back. I'll actually leave you to ask that question. I'm going to go run in and tell them that we're wrapped up. You hold the room.
Hi, Jen. Julie from Action HRX. I just wanted to let you know there is actually, we have already done a small interpretation of Bessie Flowers that you could add to your trail at the student housing project on Serpentine Road.
Yeah.
It's associated with the old State School, and I can trail with us on that to do. So up on the 3rd floor up there, in a place where we felt her contributions to education in the region that we recognised. So another spot to add to your trail.
Sounds great. Maybe the Albany City Council could add that to the guide.
Exactly.
Any other questions? Yes.
Jen, can you give us what provenance do you know of the chair?
Well, when we bought the house 2 years ago, the former owner, he'd been there for 50 years, and then his dad had been there for a couple of decades earlier, so that's kind of like 1950s. So they said that the chair was Bessie's and that she would sit at the top of the stairs and read a book quietly. So if anyone knows anything about old chairs, please come and have a look and tell me if you think it's Bessie's, but she was a small built person, so it seems like it would be a good height for her to sit and have her feet flat on the floor and to play violin so maybe it's hers. I would love that. Anyway, it lives with the house, so when we leave one day, the chair will stay.
So well by yourselves.
Yes.
Oh, hi, look, I'm in tourism, so I like that trail, the Bessie Flowers Trail through Albany. You've got people that do walks around the city, Malcolm might be a little more, but did you get people that do walks around the city, around the city of Albany, the town? Have you approached anyone about that setting up that tour?
No, and I had the idea it would be self-guided, but you could certainly have small groups wandering through there, and because you are going through a bit of bush, maybe it would be good to have a guide so that you don't get lost. Although that's hard to do in Albany because we've got so many giant landmarks. But yeah, there's certainly different applications for how this could work.
Yeah. A lot of people in that sort of instance would like to listen and hear to someone rather than look at an app or something like that, because you're trying to connect with that building or with the people and the streets. So it's about feeling a sense of place where you are, not doing it on digital stuff. So that would be the way I would suggest you go. And there must be guides around Malcolm and others not think better. I don't do day tours.
Oh, sorry, question?
I was going to say, I'm personally cool with digital as well. Sometimes I don't like people talking to me, but I just want to kind of go explore on my own.
You're a different generation than me.
And if you're short of time as well.
There is a thing I remember from my master's, it was called the Easy Travel app, and it's basically like you can create your own heritage trail, and it does that thing where when you're walking and you go a certain radius out of the site, the voice will just kind of pop out
Oh,
the phone
great.
and start talking.
Perfect.
So it's pretty cheap as an option if you want to do that as a trial run, like privately.
Sure.
Or you did the going for partnerships and stuff. But yeah.
Great idea, thank you. And last question?
I was just going to add to that, with the next generation comment on that, not the next generation comment actually, you can use augmented reality on mobile phones and so on. So I worked on a project with a authority doing augmented ghosts as videos of ghosts, so you could look through your phone and you can see the ghost stories that are animated characters and stuff. And you can do that with applying machine learning techniques to old photographs and things like that.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
And you can have geolocation and geofencing, so as you move through a trail, you can activate certain experiences in sites around a place. So I'm happy to do that.
That would be brilliant. Yeah, thanks so much.
Round of applause, please.